Number 8. Ship Graveyard. Nargan Island is a lonely and mysterious place in the Caspian Sea near Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. It's the biggest of a group of islands called the Baku Archipelago, which has a total area of about 11.6 square miles. The island has seen many tragedies and conflicts in the past. It was once used by the Russian army as a place to imprison and torture thousands of Turkish and Muslim captives during World War I, and unfortunately many of them died on the island from hunger, disease, and cold. It was also a base for the Soviet Navy during World War II, where they built a lighthouse and a radio station. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the island was abandoned and left to decay. Many of the ships were left on the shore, creating a ship graveyard that attracts curious visitors and explorers. Some of the vessels date back to the 19th century and are of historical value, and in total, there are reportedly over 20 ships on the island. Nargan Island is also home to some rare animals, like certain bird and seal species that live among the ruins. And amazingly, the island is part of a nature reserve that protects the biodiversity of the Caspian Sea. Number 7. VW vehicles. Thousands of abandoned VW vehicles, most of which are Beetles, buses, and camper vans, have been allowed to rot in places that locals refer to as graveyards for classic cars, despite the fact that they were once quite popular. A lot of these places are owned by avid collectors who try to find the most unique automobiles to add to their collection. But many of these vehicle graveyards are littered with cars that have sat too long and are now being overrun by nature. TomTom's VW Museum, a striking cemetery devoted to numerous vehicles, is situated in Moab, Utah. A father-son duo founded the company in 1971, although their automobile collection had been growing for 10 years prior to that. When they peaked at 420 vehicles on the site, they claimed to have the biggest collection of VWs in the West. But many of those vehicles have since been relocated or destroyed. Despite the fact that the property is nominally owned by a company, they never ran it as one, and instead, they'd only purchase junk vehicles. But in the end, making sales wasn't necessary for their site to become popular. Urban explorers and car fanatics from all over the world who came to visit the car graveyard learned about what they were doing through word of mouth. Sunray Bugs, which is located in the vicinity of Dade City, Florida, is no longer in business, but it was once regarded by many as one of the most remarkable VW graveyards in the world. The company has even been dubbed Disney World for VW enthusiasts by a previous employee. The 10-acre site was favored by urban explorers and interested guests who came to see the vehicles and locate outdated parts. After a neighbor objected to the appearance of the junkyard, though, Leroy Corky Yeager, the company owner, was compelled to remove the cars from his property. After discovering that his land wasn't permitted to house such a company, the county engaged in a legal dispute with Yeager. The car enthusiast finally consented to start removing the vehicles in 2010, but the process was cumbersome, requiring the county to step in and clear the site themselves. Around 800 automobiles were removed from the property over the course of 6 days, with only a few left for Yeager to handle on his own. For many people trying to maintain their own Volkswagens, this loss was terrible. In an interview with a local news channel, a loyal customer of Sunray Bugs said, "These parts are gone forever. You won't be able to get them anymore." One of the most interesting VW Beetle graveyards is Slug Bug Ranch, which is located near Conway, Texas. It's basically an art installation that memorializes the car. It's made up of 5 dilapidated Beetles that have been spray painted in all sorts of colors. These vehicles were then partly buried in the dirt, so they stick out of the earth at about a 60-degree angle. In Amarillo, next to the well-known Cadillac Ranch, lies the Slug Bug Ranch, which seems to be similar but with a little bit of a twist. In response to a sizable plaza being constructed close to these two family-owned companies, the Crutchfield family created the installation in 2002. They were worried that they'd go out of business and believed that by building a tourist destination, they'd be able to get some of their clients back. The vehicles are currently being decorated with spray paint by tourists, which may have been the owner's original idea all along. Number 6. Roselle Tram Depot. In Sydney, Australia, the Roselle Tram Depot was established in 1904 and employed over 650 people during its heyday. During its operation, Sydney's tram network was one of the biggest and most technologically sophisticated in the world. At one point, the tram depot was the second largest on the Sydney network. The final tram at the site, however, ran on February 25, 1961, as use fell off following World War II. The debut of Sydney's first tram line occurred in 1861. From the former Sydney Railway Station down Pitt Street to Circular Quay, a horse-drawn carriage service was available. The next tram line in the city was attempted as part of the Sydney International Exhibition in 1879. The steam tramway, which was initially intended to be a temporary transport installation, serviced the Royal Botanic Garden region. But because it was a huge hit, the tram system swiftly spread across the city and inner suburbs throughout the 1880s and 1890s. A Baldwin locomotive with a single or double-deck carriage was utilized by the tram system. Almost 100 of the Baldwin steam locomotives were shipped to the New South Wales government tramways after being imported from the United States. Using a power supply system derived from the New York City subway, the Sydney tram system was electrified in 1898. Then, generating plants were constructed at the White Bay and Ultimo power stations, and by 1910, the whole system was electrified. On April 17, 1904, the Roselle tram depot in Glebe opened for business, with an initial capacity of just 96 carriages. In 1907, an addition brought this number up to 125, but just 11 years later, the depot was home to 200 tram cars. Sydney's tram system was doomed by its own success because of its widespread use. In 1945, the service carried 405 million passengers. Sydney's streets were congested due to overcrowding on the trams and a rise in the number of vehicles and buses on the road. The tram system then deteriorated because of a lack of available maintenance supplies throughout the war. And in the end, the state government made the decision to terminate the system since it was no longer financially feasible to operate it. It started to be phased out in the early 1950s. In 1953, a significant number of trams from the Ultimo depot were moved to Roselle. The Glebe line, which was serviced by the depot, was closed for good in 1958, leaving the Roselle tram depot largely abandoned. Not long after, vandals broke into the station and damaged the trams that were kept there. Once the station closed, there were just 6 trams left, a tiny fraction of the number that was kept there when it was operating. Eventually, though, one of these trams was restored before being transported to the Transhed's development, where it's since been returned to a place of pride, the same area where the Roselle tram depot now serves as a repurposed food destination. Number 5. Submarine Graveyard. There's a graveyard for Russian submarines near the village of Godzievo in the Netsip-Metnaya Cove district of the Murmansk Oblast, located in the Kola Peninsula. In the 1970s, the submarines were carried to this restricted access zone, where they were abandoned after completing their underwater missions. The area is situated in northwest Russia, close to the Finnish border, and it experiences severe winds for the majority of the year. At a time in history when the Cold War was still creating chaos, shipyards found it difficult to fulfill orders they'd received for military ships. And for this reason, there was hardly any time to consider how they'd properly dispose of old submarines. According to rumors, some of the older submarines were used as targets in military drills and were often sunk as a result. Others were just left in the harbor to rust and decay, floating to the surface of the water like rotting whale carcasses. No one gave the wrecked submarines much consideration, but during the next few years, oil and rust from the hull started to pollute the water. This led to the development of a recycling strategy. Several of the submarine wrecks were lifted out of the lake using a crane, but at least one ship was incinerated in the water. But at the end of the 1990s, a private business took on the responsibility of dismantling them and salvaging their parts. The submarines that weren't demolished were put to service as training ships, and one even ended up in a museum. The survival of at least 7 hulks was shown in a Google Earth photograph from 2007, although they're likely too damaged to be salvaged at this point. What rare and vintage vehicle would you most like to own? Let us know in the comments. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. Bangkok Airplane Graveyard. The ruins of abandoned vehicles aren't often seen by the general public, but there are some that have been reclaimed by nature. This eerie scene is a perfect example of just how incredible nature can be when it comes to finding beauty in ruins and other forgotten places. The Bangkok Airplane Graveyard is an absolute must if you love urban exploration and are in Thailand. Located next to an auto body shop, this field is littered with an entire Boeing 747 and 2 smaller MD-82 jetliners. What's so amazing about this graveyard is that it doubles as a makeshift home for homeless families. It's easy to find, and it's just a short walk away from the Phra Kanong BTS station on Ramkhamhaeng Road. You really need to tread carefully when visiting this place though, since broken bits and bare metal constructions could fall at any time. It's also best to wear sturdy, closed-toed shoes and long clothes so as not to get your hands dirty. Abandoned planes don't just lie forgotten. They can be converted into some amazing works of art, or in some cases, permanent residences. Several families that are down on their luck have even opted to stay in some of these planes because, in their words, it's much better than living on the street. And although the aircraft graveyard is technically on private property, it appears as though an understanding has been reached between the owner and the families who live there. Number 3. Asmara's Tank Graveyard. The tank graveyard in Asmara, Eritrea is a field full of thousands of military vehicles that were used in a 30-year war with Ethiopia. The war began in 1861, when Eritrea fought for its independence from Ethiopia. It only ended in 1991 when Eritrea became a de facto state. The war was one of Africa's longest and bloodiest conflicts, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives and displacing millions of people. The tank graveyard is located on the outskirts of Asmara, Eritrea's capital city. It covers an area of about 37 acres and contains tanks, trucks, cars, buses, helicopters, planes, and other equipment from both sides of the war. Some of the vehicles are stacked on top of each other, forming a maze of rusting metal. Others are scattered around or buried under sand and dirt. The vehicles are mostly Soviet-made or Chinese-made models that were supplied to Ethiopia by its allies during the Cold War. The tank graveyard isn't an official tourist attraction, but it draws in visitors who want to see a reminder of Eritrea's struggle for liberation. Some visitors see it as a symbol of resilience and courage, while others see it as a testament to the waste of war. The tank graveyard also serves as a source of scrap metal for local people who salvage parts from the vehicles. The graveyard isn't well maintained or protected by the authorities, and it's often exposed to weathering and vandalism. Some vehicles have even been burned or looted by thieves, and there have been reports of unexploded ordnance in the area, posing a risk to visitors and locals alike. Number 2. French cars. Imagine finding a collection of 60 rare and vintage cars that have been hidden in a barn for decades. That's what happened to 2 experts from a French auction house called Arcurial Motor Cars in 2014. They were invited by the heirs of Roger Bayonne, a former transportation magnate who amassed a remarkable fleet of automobiles from the 1930s to the 1950s. The cars were stored under makeshift shelters and in various outbuildings on a farm in western France. They were rusting and were covered in dust, but they were also priceless gems full of automotive history. Among them were models created by several legendary car manufacturers like Maserati, Bugatti, Ferrari, Hispano-Suiza, Talbot Lago, Panhard Levasseur, Delahaye, and Delage. One of the most stunning discoveries was a Ferrari 250 GT California SWB, one of only 37 ever made. It first belonged to French actor Alain Delon, who'd been photographed in the vehicle with famous actress Jane Fonda. Amazingly, the car was estimated to be worth between $12 million and $15 million. The cars were auctioned off by Arcurial Motor Cars on February 6, 2015 in Paris. The sale attracted buyers from all over the world and fetched a total profit of $28.5 million. The Ferrari alone sold for $18.5 million, setting a new world record for a car sold at auction. The barn find was dubbed the Discovery of the Century by Arcurial Motor Cars. It was a rare opportunity to witness some of the most iconic cars ever made emerge from their long slumber. Number 1. Oranjemund. A joint venture between the government of Namibia and the De Beers diamond cartel called Namdeb, which owns 100% of the small town of Oranjemund, is known by the same name. There are significant diamond deposits there, and the town was established in order to accommodate the mine workers. It's located near the entrance of the Orange River. Security personnel monitor the area, and entry through the airport turnstiles is prohibited without permission. Employees from the mine have been known to try and sneak the jewels out while concealing them up their noses, or in some cases, they attempt to shoot them over the gates with handmade crossbows, even though doing so carries a maximum sentence of 15 years in jail. The second largest earth-moving fleet in the world is based at Oranjemund. A vehicle is never permitted to leave the mine compound once it is entered, presumably to prevent diamond smuggling. World War II tanks that were formerly used to bulldoze sand are among the rusted gear that litters the site, dating back to the 1920s. Executives from the De Beers company showed off the collection with pride in the past, but as they've become more concerned with their public image, they've started to decline having pictures taken at the graveyard. Which of these insane vehicle graveyards would you most like to visit? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!